everyone joining us from universities outside of Melbourne, and particularly those internationally. And it just goes to show how this year the competition is continuing to grow and to see that really play out. So just to introduce myself, my name is Oscar and I'm going to be this year's GMCC Director. Before we get underway, I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we live and work, and recognise their continuing connection to the land, water and community. We pay our respects to elders past and present and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Just some housekeeping. Please keep your microphone and video turned off for the duration of the presentation. And throughout the presentation, feel free to ask questions just using that Zoom chat. These will be addressed during the Q&A portions of the event. Just a brief overview of the night. We'll start by a quick introduction as to what we do on MMI as an organisation and GMCC, before heading into a segment about microfinance and our clients, before we have our professional consultants from Kearney present about cracking the case, followed up by some case comp tips and tricks from the GMCC team. So just to briefly introduce what we do on MMI as an organisation, we were founded in 2010 as the largest microfinance organisation established at an Australian university. And our mission is really just to improve the lives of underprivileged communities by promoting sustainable and inclusive business practices to microfinance institutions and also non-for-profits all across the world. With three goals, and we try to achieve these three simultaneously. First of all, to really have a direct impact on underprivileged communities, and we really do this through our initiatives consulting wing. Secondly, to empower students with practical knowledge and skills, and GMCC, this very event tonight, is one way in which we do so. And finally, and perhaps more importantly, is to inspire people such as yourselves to take action against important social issues like poverty and social inequality. So how have all this come about? Well, we've currently held 42 projects in 12 countries, run 8 events into 2020 with a total of 1,200 attendees, and collaborated with more than 50 organisations and student societies worldwide. So this is just a little infographic about our impact. You can see that we really had an impact all across the world, not just domestically, but in countries particularly like Southeast Asia, and we've even broadened towards countries in the Americas as well. Now moving on to specifically what GMCC is, the main event. First run 1 year after our release in 2011, it's now become one of the largest student-run case competitions in the world. Given the onset of COVID last year, we really use this as an opportunity to expand internationally. And in last year's edition, we reached over 2,000 students from 16 universities and 8 different countries. This year, we've reached a very similar level of impact, again, engaging 16 universities from all across the world. Our goal is really to equip students with skills required to solve really pressing issues, and particularly for an organisation that does this incredible work in Southeast Asia. So how does GMCC differ from other case competitions that you may see out there? Well, first of all, it's live. So what this means is that the impact that you'll be creating through your slide presentations will have a tangible impact by helping a real microfinance institution. Secondly, it allows you to use these skills that you've developed throughout university and really put them into practice in a global context as well, allowing you to broaden your understanding of how the world works. And lastly, of course, there's the opportunity to win up to $1,000 in a grand prize. And importantly, for domestic and New Zealand teams, you'll have the opportunity to interview for Kearney as well. So what will you develop through GMCC? Soft skills, of course, as part of your teamwork and presentation communication. Those are all critical skills that you develop through this case competition. Technical skills such as modeling, slide creation, problem solving, and importantly, you'll develop an understanding of microfinance and how that fits in with technology, which is always improving, as you all know, on a day-to-day basis. And finally, we'll also have the opportunity to engage with students and professionals from all across the world through our global reach.
So just an overview of the areas that, well, the locations that we'll be covering this year. We've got students from all across the world, as you can see. Particularly, we've maintained our core partner universities in Australia of UTS, UNSW, USyd, ANU, Monash, and the University of Auckland, and of course, the University of Western Australia, some of which are here today. We've kept in contact with many of our friends from Singapore, so Singapore Management University and NUS. And in particular, we've also got a number of participants from India today, as well as universities such as University of Belgrade, UCL, and a few from Alberta. So we've got University of Alberta, University of British Columbia, and one US university, the University of Illinois. So now I'd like to pass it on over to our initiatives team for the first segment of the evening, and they will speak more about what microfinance is and to introduce our client.
Thanks, Oscar. Hi, everyone. I'm Faith. I'm here with my co-vice president of initiatives, Jade, as well as two of our project consultants from the EMI team, Angela and Yasser. So we'll just talk a little bit more about microfinance and give some insight into EMI as well. So I guess in order to understand microfinance, we have to first understand the concept of financial inclusion. It's something that many of us often take for granted. Things like being able to make a transaction online, download a buy now, pay later app and indulge in way too much online shopping during lockdown, transfer money to friends, access insurance, or something even as simple as having access to a bank account. And while these might seem normal to us, there are 1.7 billion people across the world that still don't have access to banking services. It might be because they don't have collateral to offer and lack a credit history, making it difficult to obtain a loan from a bank, or the fact that they live in rural areas which are difficult to reach and located far away from physical bank branches. But what all of this means essentially is that these people are unable to accumulate savings and therefore struggle to meet unexpected financial shocks, such as job losses or medical emergencies, and invest in things like healthcare, education, or the expansion of their business. Instead, when they're in need of an immediate source of credit, they're usually forced to turn to unregulated moneylenders such as loan sharks, who seek to exploit them by charging extremely high interest rates. And as a result, a lot of these families are pushed into inescapable debt traps. So just moving on to the next slide now. Microfinance aims to address this issue and promote financial inclusion by providing banking services ethically and responsibly to low-income individuals who otherwise wouldn't have access to them. Through the power of microcredit or affordable small-scale loans, people are able to start or invest in small businesses, become self-sufficient, and generate a sustainable level of income to support their families. At MMI, we see microfinance as a tool to promote financial inclusion and alleviate poverty, a concept that underpins our initiatives division, where we provide pro bono consulting services for organizations ranging from microfinance institutions, not-for-profits, fintech startups, to government organizations, all of which are driven to improve financial inclusion and really try and make an impact in underprivileged communities. Microcredit differs quite a bit from other typical forms of credit offered by commercial banks, in the sense that it doesn't require borrowers to have a form of credit history or have collateral either, like property or an asset that the bank can claim if they default on their loan. Instead, it often relies on something called social collateral, which refers to the trust and the social ties that exist within communities already. And so in that sense, microfinance is often a lot more community-based in the approach taken by organizations. Repayment schedules also tend to be more flexible, I guess, as the name suggests as well. The size of the loan is a lot smaller than what you could typically get from a commercial bank. For example, some MFIs offer $20 to $50 loans to help people with daily income smoothing, and a couple of other key characteristics that Jade will talk about more later. So just moving on to the next slide. I want to dive a little bit deeper now into the history of microfinance and how it came about. So essentially, the concept was pioneered by Muhammad Yunus, an economist from Bangladesh, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for launching Grameen Bank, the very first microfinance institution in the 1980s. And in his words, microfinance is dedicated to solving the problems of the poor in a way that's affordable for them and therefore has the power to create economic and social development from below. This sort of Grameen Bank model has since expanded to over 100 countries and played a really big role in catalyzing widespread recognition of how microfinance loans can be used to help lift people out of poverty and really empower entire communities. So I'll now pass over to Jay to talk a little bit more about how this model actually works.
Great. Thank you, Faith. So moving on to the next slide, I just wanted to cover a little bit more about how microfinance works in terms of the key characteristics. So firstly, dynamic repayment incentives are used, and that can include access to new loans of larger amounts upon each successful repayment. And as Faith alluded to earlier, repayments are also made publicly to induce a sense of peer pressure. That is also encouraged by this group lending structure because it means that people can only access credit if the other members in their group have paid their installments. As a result, this allows microfinance to reach more borrowers in a community because it removes that requirement for collateral to secure loans and instead relies on joint liability. Thirdly, there's a focus on women due to a number of reasons. Firstly, poverty in the developing world is often feminized so that the majority of the poor are women. Secondly, women have been shown to be less risky borrowers for microfinance institutions, and also they're more likely than men to invest their income in activities that improve the welfare of the household, thus raising overall economic development. And finally, microfinance essentially encourages entrepreneurship. By providing the means to save and borrow money, and in some cases, even insurance, microfinance plays this key role in helping low-income individuals bring their innovative ideas to life and ultimately become self-sufficient businesses. So a beneficiary of microfinance illustrated in this case study as you meet Maria from the Foundation for International Community Assistance, or FINCA, we can see that as she accesses these financial services, she's able to help her family as she expands her business, while also creating employment for others in her community, ultimately empowering her to become a breadwinner for her family, but also someone who provides a strong economic contribution to the community that she's part of. Moving on to the next slide, of course, microfinance can be successful, but it's not a panacea. It's not going to be a complete solution for alleviating poverty. And as research and history have shown, microfinance is definitely an ideal source of credit when you're comparing it to the short-term capital offered by loan sharks. However, it is still credit, it's not a donation. And that lack of financial literacy amongst women and rural communities is of significant concern. It means that if borrowers don't actually understand how to properly manage their funds, it can result in a situation where their living standards and their income is ultimately unchanged because their additional income is pretty much eroded by this increased interest repayment, therefore creating debt cycles and an overall ineffectiveness of microfinance in that community. With the strategic use of group lending structures and financial or business literacy programs, this effectiveness of microfinance can actually be enhanced, as well as the community cohesion among the lendees. However, as mentioned before, microfinance being targeted towards women presents a double-edged sword in which this great disruption of gender hierarchies gives women more autonomy to manage their family's finances. But if males within the household aren't equipped to deal with this transition, they may react negatively and potentially even present a danger. We also want to emphasize that microfinance is not designed for the poorest segment of society. Microcredit is designed for those with some income, with a job and therefore able to repay their loans by using credit to raise their incomes through employment. Given all these considerations, it's really important we're aware of the need for a multifaceted approach when using microfinance. And as mentioned previously, that can be literacy classes, training programs, and at a higher level, governments who want to embrace the use of microfinance in their economies can create infrastructure investments or reforms in the regulation of microfinance industry. Moving on to the next slide. In recent years, we've also seen this emergence of many financial technology or fintech innovations within the microfinance sector. So this improvements in the global infrastructure, greater mobile phone penetration, and accessibility to big data through all of our use of social media, cloud services, and databases means that the initial barriers that are limiting microfinance access to underserved markets are actually providing opportunities to overcome them. For example, difficulty assessing the credit worthiness of a borrower can mean that instead we use an alternative credit scoring method that is using an algorithm from smartphone metadata. Secondly, the physical presence of loan officers being required in a community to fill out those paperwork, fill out those applications, that can be automated and streamlined through an online customer onboarding system. And thirdly, this high cost of scaling into regions that are geographically isolated means that if microfinance institutions begin to digitize their businesses, they lower their operating costs and therefore widen coverage into remote areas. In times of crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, it's definitely crucial for digital financial services to be a larger part of our research as we look to increase financial inclusion. I'm now going to hand it over to Angela and Yasa to provide us with an overview of EMI.
Awesome, thanks Jade. So my name is Angela.
And I'm Yasa.
And we're currently the project consultants working with EMI this year. So just a little bit of context about our project. We are currently working on how EMI can incorporate the use of a third-party agent model to help facilitate transactions between them and their borrowers. But as you'll soon find out, this is probably quite different from the case that you will be given. So unfortunately, we can't give you any handy tips on how to solve your case. But what we can give you is we can give you guys a really brief rundown of the type of organization you'll be providing solutions for. So hopefully the next few minutes will give you guys a really good head start and understanding of your problem's context.
Thanks. So before we start talking about EMI, I think it'll be helpful to discuss some of the context surrounding EMI and their operations. EMI was founded in a country called Laos. Laos is a small nation with a population of about 7 million people located in Southeast Asia. It's completely landlocked, bordered by Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Myanmar. It is a relatively poor socialist nation with one of the lowest per capita GDPs in Asia. The majority of the very ethnically diverse population lives around the Mekong, the main river system, the Mekong Delta, and the majority of the economic activities conducted within Laos center around subsistence farming and mining for raw materials. Despite their poverty, they have been showing exceptional signs of change and growth. They have consistently maintained one of the highest rates of growth out of any developing nation in the world. And in addition, there have been other very positive signs, such as rising educational levels and the government's enthusiasm to open up Laos to the world while shifting the nation towards a more market-oriented economy. EMI is a completely private company founded in 2005 by 10 local Lao shareholders. It was founded with a strong focus on adhering closely to international standards surrounding microfinance. It issued its first loan in 2006 and since then has expanded its operations to just under 800 villages in the nation. They have worked hard to provide accessible credit to low to medium income households in the rural parts of the nation through a variety of innovative products. They are an organization who believe in the principles of sustainable development and innovation to improve the quality of life for the Lao people. I'll pass it on to Angela. And the next slide, please.
Yeah, So with this in mind, EMI has 4 organizational objectives that underpin everything that they do. So their first goal primarily focuses on providing excellent financial services such as loans, saving accounts, and most recently, a micro-insurance loan which serves to protect their consumers in unforeseen circumstances. Now, moving on to EMI's second goal, EMI strives to increase their clients' financial literacy so they actually understand how to manage their money, how to budget for their needs, and how to grow their businesses sustainably. In the pre-COVID days, EMI would host various workshops and seminars in multiple villages to provide this financial knowledge to the locals. Now, EMI's third goal centers around their willingness to continually invest in their education of their employees. And finally, their last goal seeks to promote long-term sustainability in their services. So these 4 goals act as the foundation to their overarching mission, which is to offer a wide range of financial services and education, primarily to low and medium income households so that they can strengthen their family livelihoods and businesses long into the future. Next slide, please, Oscar. Awesome. So what kind of financial services do they actually provide? As you can see here, EMI offers 3 primary products to their clients, and this is all categorized into loans, savings, and insurance. EMI offers a variety of loans spanning from individual, group, and salary or employee loans. And they recently introduced MSME, which stands for Micro, Small, Medium Enterprise Loan, as well as the COVID-19 relief loan. As you can see, these loans are quite versatile in order to suit the differing characteristics of their borrowers. So ensuring that these loans are tailored to what the individual actually needs. And what is quite notable here is that some of these actually have quite a high loan amount and are also quite long-term. And the main reason for this is to increase the opportunities for their customers to actually use these loans in productive ways rather than constantly worrying about, how to pay back the loans. There are also a few different deposits, namely the savings account and the Smart Kids Saver, that allows school children to deposit a certain amount of money and earn a 3% interest rate per year. This not only encourages these children to save from an early age, but will also facilitate the next generation of Laos children to become more financially literate. And finally, very recently, EMI also pioneered the very first micro-insurance loan. So for those who don't really know what that is, essentially a micro-insurance loan helps to protect vulnerable people against unexpected calamities, such as crop failure, property damage, illnesses, or maybe accidents. Because right now, I guess the current insurance markets in these developing countries are either inefficient or non-existent. So micro-insurance fills this gap and serves as a type of tailored insurance to people in these poorer nations. And there are 3 main factors that allows microinsurance to be so successful. 1, they're simple and easy to understand. Secondly, they're accessible for people living in rural areas. And most importantly, they are affordable. So with all this in mind, the question is, what has EMI achieved in the last 15 years and how has that contributed to financial inclusion in Laos?
Thanks. Just the next slide, please. Since 2006, EMI has accomplished much in Laos. They have expanded their operations to almost 800 villages in the nation, have placed much emphasis on the sustainability of their operations. In terms of both the risk that they face as lenders, as well as the financial well-being of their clients. EMI have put also a strong focus on improving financial literacy in the nation through their Smart Kids Saving program that provides financial accessibility for savings and education to the next generation. They have also innovated on a suite of products that suit a variety of situations that people in rural areas of the nation may face throughout their lives. With the COVID-19 pandemic, many in Laos faced lockdowns and reduced trade with the international market, affecting exports and daily life. In response to this, EMI developed a relief loan for these households and businesses who needed it the most. Furthermore, as mentioned before, the micro insurance product is the first of its kind all over the world. Laos is a nation that is changing every day in many different ways, and EMI is playing a big role in encouraging this growth, especially for those rural, lower and middle income households and businesses who often get left behind during times of change and growth. Microfinance is a strong tool that can help developing nations improve their economic and social development, and EMI is a prime example of these services being used to do this. The purpose of this presentation was to provide a brief introduction and overview of the terms and concepts that you will see in this case. And we hope that it's been helpful for you in understanding them. We hope that this context will be helpful to you in understanding and breaking down the case, along with the tips and tricks given by the Kearney consultants in the next segment. I'll hand it back to Oscar. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Faith, Jade, Yester, and Angela. Really insightful thoughts about not only the current state of microfinance, and also just about the work that you guys do for EMI. It seems really incredible and obviously really good thing to be working towards. I think something that I'd be wondering, and I'm sure many others are also wondering, is where you guys think microfinance is headed over the next few years, especially with technology always changing year on year. Do you guys have thoughts about how that has evolved?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. It's definitely something that Jay touched on a little bit before in her part as well. Like technology is moving so quickly, and I think like just in the context of Laos as well, like it's really interesting because Laos fintech sector is kind of quite underdeveloped compared to a lot of neighboring Southeast Asian countries where you're seeing like a lot of fintech startups pop up. And so EMI, it's pretty cool what they're doing. I guess you can sort of see them as an industry leader in the space. So they've also got like a lot of other microfinance institutions in Laos kind of looking to them to see what they do. And so, yeah, I guess they're like very much on the forefront of technology in Laos. So they're kind of like paving the way for the whole country to sort of transition to a more digital model, which is super exciting, I think. So it'll be something really interesting to watch over the next couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even with increased uptake in technology, are there still areas that microfinance fails to address?
I guess from my personal experience with the projects I've been in over the last 2 years, microfinance doesn't necessarily address the fact that these people that are taking on these loans have other priorities. And sometimes these loans don't end up getting used for starting a business, but instead it's used to pay for their children's school fees. It's used to pay for electricity, for rent, for food. And it's really difficult when the assessment of who we lend to doesn't involve an assessment of their financial literacy, as I mentioned before. And the classes, the training programs aren't accessible enough. And that's why microfinance definitely can't be a loan solution when it comes to helping people get out of poverty. You have to account for all of their other priorities as well.
Yeah, definitely. So again, really insightful thoughts there, and I'm sure everyone here is going to find that extremely useful. So now just moving on to our second segment of the evening, I'd love to warmly welcome our Kearney consultants, Vanshika and James, to introduce themselves and speak about how to crack a case.
Thanks. Thank you. Van, can you pop the slide up?
Yeah, let me share my screen.
Cool, Vance.
I'm not good with Zoom, so this might not work, but let's give it a go.
Yeah, okay, I can see it.
Sick.
All right, cool, Vance. Can you just flip to the second slide? All right. Hey, hello. Just in the interest of time, we might immediately kick on. So just by way of introduction, we're Vanchika and I are two consultants from Kearney. one of the oldest and largest consulting firms with offices around the globe. And in Australia, you'll find that we have a particular expertise in strategic operations and procurement. So today we're here to talk you guys through a case, and tips and what you guys should look for. Now the timing is going to be about 35 minutes walking through the actual case, with 5 minutes of Q&A at the end. So just brief introductions. My name is James. I'm a business analyst at Kearney. My background is commerce and law, so one of those people. And prior to joining Kearney, I'd worked across law, accounting, and risk management. Decided I liked business better, so chose to pursue a career in management consulting. Van?
Hello everyone, I'm Van Schuker. I'm a senior business analyst from the Melbourne office. I studied commerce, accounting and finance, another classic combo at university. I'm in Auckland, and yeah, that's me.
All right, cool, Vance. Next slide. So just briefly before we get into actually cracking the case, what is management consulting? Essentially in management consulting, we're in the business of solving problems. And broadly, there are 3 reasons why we'll get hired. The first would be to, gain objective external advice. The second being to access our specialized expertise. Maybe we've done a similar project in the past. And the third would be being brought in on a one-time project where permanent hiring really just isn't justified either due to cost or time. Now, in terms of what we actually do on a day-to-day basis, it varies quite a lot. But generally what you're doing at a high level is you're working to solve hypotheses that all kind of branch up to an overall issue that you're trying to solve. Now, I know that that's very vague, but in terms of what that looks like for me at the junior level, it's been a lot of modeling in the past couple of weeks and doing a lot of the analysis. So you get thrown in the deep end from day one. As you move up, it becomes less and less about the actual doing it and more about, managing the team, making sure they're on track, guiding the analysis, and also managing clients and partners. So next slide, then. So the case interview is the centerpiece of the consulting interview. And there's actually a really good reason why we give the case interview. When you're working in consulting, you've often got tight deadlines, lots of pressure. So you need to be able to solve things efficiently, and you need to be able to drive a problem or drive towards an outcome. So the cases we'll give you in interviews are very similar to cases that we've done in the past. And broadly, I'd say that they fit into 5 categories. You have industry analysis, which is like, is this industry good? Market expansion, should we go into this market? Pricing, how much should we charge for X? Profit improvement, like I just want to make more money. And investment and divestment decisions, which can just be like, is this particular venture a good idea? So just moving to the next slide. There are 2 key things that you get measured on during a case interview, and I imagine the same criteria will apply for the case competition that you're all about to embark on. Broadly, it is, 1, do you have strong critical and logical thinking skills? And then the second is, do you have people skills? Now, Van Schuker will be discussing this later on, so I'll just kind of skim the next 2 slides that we have. But just pointing out the key things to do and key things not to do. The first key thing that you absolutely must do is ask clarifying questions. The interviewer and whoever's judging your presentation will, 100% know if you have no idea what you're talking about. So it's better to clarify that misconception early on, so you can, get about solving the problem. The next one is to use diagrams and issue trees, because it can help show the interviewer that, you're thinking logically, and you know where to go, and you know where to go next if you don't find a solution. The next ones I would call out would be, challenge conventions, be creative. you know, in consulting, we're in the business of solving problems. And sometimes that comes hand in hand with, you know, being a bit creative about the solutions that we do propose. And then the last one is to show your intellectual curiosity. You know, consulting is a very fast-paced environment. You learn a lot, and we definitely want to see someone who can thrive in that environment. In terms of things not to do, the biggest one I would call out is don't try and force fit a standard framework to the case that you've been given. So I think that the utility of all of those books that you'll read on consulting case interviews, like, you know, Case in Point, for example, I think the utility of those structures only extend to helping you understand what are some of the key factors that might arise in the case, but not necessarily helping you think about, you know, how to go through all of the issues that could arise in a logical manner. And I would encourage you to think about structures in that way. So just moving on to the next slide. So we're a people business, and we're really looking for people who are people. There's really two reasons why we need that. You know, the first is that in consulting, you're always going to be working very closely with another person. So you need to be able to work collaboratively with them. And then the second is you're always going to be working with clients. So you need to be able to, you know, convince them of your point of view and work collaboratively with them to solve the issue. Now, in terms of the important things to do that I would call out, again, admit when you don't know, just because the interviewer 100% knows if you have no idea what you're talking about. The next would be to communicate clearly and concisely, demonstrate poise under pressure. Now, in terms of things not to do in the case interview, absolutely don't ignore client guidance, because client guidance in the case interview is basically the interviewer telling you like where you need to go, or that you're just completely off the mark. And then the next one would be don't deny mistakes. You know, like if you make a mistake, don't like double down on it. You know, try and pivot or acknowledge it, pivot away, move on. So I'll now hand over to Van just to talk through the 4 big parts of cracking a case, and just some tips and tricks.
Awesome, thank you, James. So let's jump into what your case interview will actually look like and the structure that it will follow, and then some kind of best practices at each of these steps and what to avoid. So at a high level, we've got these four key steps. So number 1, scope and problem, structure the problem. Then you've got collect and evaluate data, followed by assembling the solution and then articulating your findings. So in terms of what this will actually look like in your case interview, number 1, the interviewer will read out a problem statement. So, you know, XY company is experiencing loss in profits, and they'll give you some details. My advice there would be to pause after they said that's the initial problem statement. Play it back to them, play back what you understand from it, ask, like James said, ask all of your clarifying questions up front, and then pause and say, can I have a couple of minutes to structure my thoughts? And this is where you will jot down your framework. And again, it's really important that you don't force fit frameworks, because it's really obvious when someone is just regurgitating a framework that they know and just trying to make the situation fit in there. And you don't get points for doing that. I think, like what James said earlier, like the value in knowing a lot of different cases is being across all of the different factors, and kind of knowing what factors you can pull in. And if you know 10 different frameworks, you'll be able to kind of make a really tailored framework in this situation. But the idea is not to force fit a framework. This stage will then be followed by collecting and evaluating data. So this is when you dive into each of the components of your framework and ask further questions. Oftentimes there'll be some component of like maths in here, and you'll be kind of driving to an answer. You'll be kind of either validating or rejecting your hypotheses. Part 3 is about, okay, what is the actual solution? So we've identified all of these issues and I know exactly where things are going wrong. This part you can be a little bit more creative in and come up with a solution. And then lastly, it's articulating your findings. So it's often, oh, the CEO just walked into the room. How would you summarize the situation to them? And you step through 1 to 3 really clearly and concisely in that final stage. I will now go through the key success factors in each of these, and then the common mistakes. So if we start with scoping and structuring the problem, I think a really good answer here would be a really structured framework. You've organized all of the information that's been provided to you, you understand the question, you've asked all of your clarifying questions up front, and listened to the responses and accommodated for that in your answer. Common mistakes is, again, kind of the opposite of that. So lacking structure, force-fitting a framework, or not taking that time up front to actually structure it properly at all and just kind of moving into an answer. I think that's fairly common, and a place where people often trip up is not taking this time, because I feel like if you get step 1 correct and you really have a clear structure, the rest of your case will flow very nicely and very smoothly. So take that time up front to really get this right. Next is collecting and evaluating your data. And what good looks like here is having clear hypotheses and assumptions, and we'll talk through this with an example later. But it's, what answer am I actually driving towards? Because you could have a structure and not really use it. But it's having a structure and then following it through with this stage and saying, okay, what data do I need in order to answer all of the things that I asked up front? It's about keeping it high level, and again, not jumping right into the details, because that's a common mistake here is, you'll be asked a question and you'll just spit out an answer. It's about taking the time to organize your thoughts and walk through everything logically. The tombstone at the bottom, that's really important. So the client's probably got more information. So your interviewer probably is holding stuff back from you on purpose. So ask all of those questions. And I think, again, it just all ties back to having a really good framework with everything laid out. Next stage is assembling your solution. So this is all about kind of, okay, now you've got a framework, you've got some data, you've got some answers. How do I then link that to a solution? I think what good would look like here is if everything kind of flows logically. So you've got a structure, you've then gone and, collected all of this data, and you've said, okay, either my initial hypothesis was true or false, and that means blank. So it's being able to link everything properly and understanding the significance of your data as well. Common mistakes is you lose that logic chain somewhere along the way, and you answer kind of a different question or something entirely different. That is not ideal. So again, all these steps, just keep linking it all back to your framework, all back to the original problem statement. And then lastly, articulating your findings. I think the most important part here is you answer the question completely, and you've summarized like all of the steps that you've gone through, and it's persuasive, it's not too rambly, it's straight into the point. Any questions? Otherwise, we'll skip through. Cool. I'll hand back to James to now talk through the case example that we'll be walking through.
All right, cool beans. So case example, I'll just pause for a moment and let everyone read it, and then I'll read it out, I suppose. So our client is a national retailer, which has been steadily losing market share to its competitors. Our client utilizes a high-low pricing strategy in which regular prices are typically slightly higher than those of everyday low price retailers. However, periodically high-low retailers drop prices significantly. During the time period in which a product's price is decreased, the product is also promoted through a print and in-store advertising. So our client expects a significant lift in sales during the periods in which a product is promoted. However, benchmarks against industry averages indicate that our client does not experience as large of a lift in sales as its competitors do during promotions. So just for context, high-low retailers are basically retailers that, price stuff really high, and then we'll have very frequent discounts to get that price low to try and get people in because everyone thinks it's an amazing deal. So in terms of practical examples, Harvey Norman would be one, but also I don't know if you guys have seen all of those like rug stores that are like, going out of business like 70% off. They're basically using a high-low strategy. Now, the first step when you get the case is to understand the fundamental problem that you're actually being asked to solve and what outcome the client wants. So for example, if I gave you a case that was like, our client wants to invest in a lemonade stand. Do we think it's a good idea? Essentially, what the client wants to know is, am I going to make money from this venture? And a good way that you can get there is by asking clarifying questions. So in that lemonade stand example, it might be, what is the time frame of the investment? Are they satisfied if they're just making profit? And then that way you can kind of frame up the outcome that your client wants, the problem that you're trying to solve, and then work backwards from that. So, for example, in the lemonade stand example, if you find out, all they want to do is make money over a 5-year period, well, then all you need to do is a 5-year NPV. So in that, along that vein, let's open it up to some audience participation. Does anyone have any clarifying questions that they might want to ask? Feel free to use chat. Is high-low pricing strategy the industry standard? I'm not sure, Van. Feels like a lot of people are doing it nowadays.
Yeah.
So does anyone have any clarifying questions? Just pop them in chat. Yep, good. Any digital marketing or like what digital marketing are they doing? What is the product? Yep, because that'll influence consumer spending habits. When does this periodic drop in prices occur? Yep. So how frequently do they discount? I.e., if they're discounting all year, then their promotions are probably pretty bad, right? Yep. Is the business seasonal / fad based? Who are our customers? Yep. All great answers. So these are some really good clarifying questions to ask during the case. Some of them might not be appropriate for setting up the actual case. So for example, asking how the sales differ from the competitors more so would tie to a hypothesis around that our marketing strategy isn't as effective as our competitors, and that would be something that you would test during the actual case interview. In terms of good or like really good clarifying questions, the one about what is the product is absolutely crucial. Because that'll let you know, what are the customers' spending habits likely to be, and all of that. Like for example, if it's a car, people don't buy cars like 3 times a year, right? So moving on to the next exercise. Oh, back to the previous slide, Van. Does anyone have any ideas on how they would structure this case? You can also put them in chat, or if you want brownie points, you can hop on microphone. No ideas on how to structure the case. So when I guess when I say structure the case, what I really mean is identify different buckets of topics that you're going to be looking into. And one really important principle as you think about these buckets is that they have to be what's called MICE, so mutually exclusive, conclusively exhaustive. And what I mean by that is you want your buckets to cover all of the potential issues that could arise. So for example, if I came to you and I said, my lemonade stand is losing money, all of the issues that could relate to my lemonade stand losing money is contained within revenue and costs. Like there's nothing else. Everything exists within those two buckets. So the different approaches we have are demand size approach. Yep. So looking at supply and demand. We also have product, customers, and competitors. Yep, good as well. I think the challenge that you would run into with having a product, customers, competitors split is that product and customers are quite interrelated. So you wouldn't you wouldn't have mutually exclusive buckets per se. So Van, if we just skip two slides forward, the demand size approach is how we would approach this question. And again, the reason we split it up into supply and demand is because, all of the issues about why we're not selling stuff is contained within supply and demand. And within that, there are, four hypotheses that we would focus on. On the demand side, we'll look at, customer preferences to figure out, why people aren't buying our product. Marketing, to figure out, is this a marketing issue? Are our promotions not good enough? Do we need to change our strategy? And on the supply side, we might look at supply chain issues. So maybe the reason we're not making money is just because it's not getting to, like our products aren't getting to the stores. And competition, we would want to look at, what are our competitors doing? Do they drop their prices in the same period as us? So that's all from me. We'll now move on to, collecting and evaluating the data.
Cool, thanks, James. So next stage is to collect data that is going to be relevant to the hypotheses that we stated in the first section. If I go to the next slide, I think what's important here is, theoretically under each of these hypotheses, you could go on and collect thousands of bits of data, but it's about prioritizing the questions that you ask. So if I get an answer to this, am I going to be able to either validate the hypothesis I made or actually say, nah, that's not true. That's the wrong hypothesis. So it's a well-structured hypothesis tree will actually allow you to very efficiently evaluate the data. So if we go through each of these, let's look at the kind of questions we'll be asking under each one. So under consumer preferences, we've got, okay, what are the customer responses look like to the promotions? And how does their satisfaction score compare when we have promotions running and when we don't? So we can do some kind of comparisons there. Then you've got marketing, and it's about our marketing campaigns. What methods are we using to reach our customers? That's one part. And what kind of customers are we targeting? And do those two things align? If it's in the campaigns, actually reach the kind of customers that we want to target? And then on the supply side, we've got supply chain. So this is about, suppliers' ability to give us sufficient volume for inventory when there's actually a promotion going on. So if someone was to walk into the store and there's a sale, are they going to actually find that item on the shelf because our supplier has been able to provide it in time and in enough quantity? And then the last thing is competition. So our hypothesis here is that the pricing strategy is more expensive than our competitors. Is that the case? Or is it, is the price the same, but the actual volume is different? So if I go to the next slide, I'll skip through this one. This has pretty much got similar questions to the one before, but it's important here to kind of evaluate each one of your buckets with multiple angles. So for example, competition, you're looking at that both from the perspective of the price of the competitor and then the sales that they generate, because again, that is MECE. On the supply chain side, you're looking at, are the suppliers able to provide the inventory? Who from the client side is responsible for ordering the stock? And what methods do they use to order that stock? Is it, just they feel like, oh, I want to order 10 today, I want to order 20 tomorrow? Or is there some kind of rigor behind how they do that? Any questions? Otherwise, I'll skip through to the next slide, which will have some basically answers to these questions. Cool. So if we talk through the key data points here, and keep in mind this will be the data that then we link back to our hypothesis tree and link back to each of the hypotheses to say, okay, you know, this hypothesis is true or false, and that then dictates the kind of answer to our case. So if we start with competition, our clients' everyday prices, timing promotions and percent discounts are virtually identical to the competitors. So our previous question was, you know, price and volume from the competition perspective, and we're saying that price is completely pretty much constant. So it must be the volume that's the potential issue. Then we've got marketing, and by the sounds of it, you know, we're using all of the right ways to market, and we are reaching most of our target customers as well. So that doesn't look like it's the issue. Supply chain. So store managers base the size of their promotional orders on the quantities ordered in the past on a similar promotion and more subjective factors, and also base it on gut feel. So it doesn't look like there is a lot of rigor to this. It's, okay, what did we order last time? And what do I feel? How much do I think is going to sell? There's no real, I guess, data and analytics behind how they make these decisions. And then customer preference. You've got customers usually complaining that, you know, there isn't stock on the shelf. So I see a promotion and I get to the store to buy it and it's not actually there. And sorry, back on the supply chain side, the other issue there is they don't actually know that they're out of stock on something unless a customer has complained about it. So they also don't have that like transparency and visibility there. I'll pause there for a second for any questions. Otherwise, I'll skip through. Cool. So if we look back to our tree, from what we found out in the slide before, we know that the issue isn't really on the demand side. So, no, from a consumer preference perspective, we're kind of reaching the right customers. They're satisfied with the prices. And then from marketing, again, we're reaching the right target market. We've been using the right techniques to reach out. The issue seems to be more on the supply side. So it's one in supply chain, which is, you know, we don't really have transparency into what that looks like. We've got managers that base things on gut feel. And then on the competition side as well, with, you know, if our prices are the same as price and promotion cycles the same as our competitors, why are our volumes then lower? Some next stage is to then assemble your solution. So based on everything that we found out so far, what is, I guess, the answer? And this is a general kind of, I guess, framework that you can go through to get to that. So you've got your findings, your conclusions, and then your recommendations. I think what's really, really important to understand here is the distinction between a finding and a conclusion. So a finding is a confirmed fact. So it's just a statement that is true. It doesn't tell you anything more than that. A conclusion is where you use that information to actually derive an answer. So it's logically derived from a finding. And then you've got your recommendation. And that's something that's action oriented. That's something that you can actually go out and do. So a really, really simple example of this could be, your finding could be that the sky is blue. There's nothing more to that. That's just your fact. Your conclusion from that could be, oh, it hasn't rained today because the sky is blue. So that's something that I've actually found out from just observing the sky. And then your recommendation could be, okay, I can go for a walk without an umbrella because I know that the sky is blue, which means that it hasn't rained. simple example, but it's really important to have that distinction clear in your mind. Because it's not ideal to jump from a finding to a recommendation because you've got a logic gap there. So if we walk through each of the 3 findings that we've got in front of us. So number 1, the pricing is identical to our competitors, which means the conclusion is a client's promotion generate less volume than competitors. So if the pricing aspect of your equation is constant, then the issue must be coming from the volume side. Number 2, the client has an ability to keep promoted items on shelves, experiencing repeated shortages. And your conclusion is your promoted items aren't actually in stock. So you've got, customers coming in and they can't actually get your stock, which links to the last one, which is store managers plan for promotions based on gut feel and historical stock ordered, not sold. So there doesn't really seem to be any rigor in how they do this. And your conclusion is ineffective promotion planning and execution, causing missed sales opportunities. From those findings and conclusions, we can then work towards a recommendation. So that's your kind of final answer. And we've just got a quick list here, and it's usually just around including past sales in your when you're ordering in your process planning, as opposed to just what you've ordered in the past, and just having more visibility in your process. So your store managers, just being trained better, having more visibility into the best way to order. Your last section then is to articulate findings. And this is in the case kind of your last moment to shine. It will be, often, CEO walked into the room, what do you tell them? And you go through each of the 3 steps and you answer the question, and you follow that up with the relevant bits of data that support that. I would hand back over to James to go over the key points to remember when you're looking to ace the case.
I was on mute. Okay, so just before we go into that, we did have a question there. When it comes to a recommendation, how do we go about it if we don't know anything about the industry? Basically, what if our recommendation is something totally different to how the industry normally operates?
It's a good question. Sometimes you will be thrown in a case where you're not familiar with the industry. And I think this is, again, where your clarifying questions up front will be really important. So it's fine to not know all the ins and outs of the industry, and I think that's expected. But it's about, being clear on that upfront and asking the right questions up front. So by the time that you get to the recommendation stage, you have enough information about the industry in order to answer the question. So that's one part. And the second part is also your framework. And your framework will, I guess, guide you. If you've set your framework up well, you've asked the right questions, you've kind of drilled down to the right issues of the case, then your recommendations will flow from that.
Yep, great answer. So just moving on to key points, basically everything that we've already said, right? Have a framework, have a process, don't kind of just go gun-ho. Think big picture, think about the outcome, and be results oriented. Make sure you're thinking about all of the different alternatives as well. Also make sure you're coachable and that you're listening to what the client in the case is saying, because they'll usually be trying to lead you on the right path. But also kind of sense check your solutions, like ask if they actually make sense. So for example, if you're doing a pricing case and it's like, how much should we price this apple? It's probably not going to be like $100, right? So if you can kind of build those checks in, you'll do well during the case interview. So just before we get into questions, summer internship plug. Our summer internship is open right now. 26th of August, closes at midnight. Feel free to apply. final year and penultimate year. In terms of tips that I would give for the application process, so for the cover letter, the tip that I would give is that it's very important to be short and concise. In consulting, you're dealing with a lot of detail, which you need to synthesize and present back to your manager, partners, and clients. So it's really important that you can be very precise, and the cover letter is really an opportunity for you to demonstrate that fact. So a good guidepost for how long a cover letter should be can range anywhere from, I think, 350 words to about 450. The general gist of it is that if you're making your margins really, really small and you've got like 10-point font and you're just cramming everything together, it's way too long. And in terms of like how you can actually get your word count down, one important thing to realize is that you don't need 10 experiences you don't need to write out 10 experiences to demonstrate that you've got like problem solving skills, right? Just focus on one really good experience that captures everything, and write about that. In terms of the interview, I would say that Kearney, more so than other firms, focuses on cultural fit, I think. So, it's really important that you let your personality shine through during the process. So we just had a question, is it open to international students? I actually don't know. Ben?
Not sure, sorry. Terrible answer.
Yeah, I mean, if you send me a message on LinkedIn, I'll find out for you, and I'll just message you back. Yeah. But yeah, moving on to the Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? Like, Owen, is it enough?
So for this one, myself and the GMCC team will provide you with some final tips and tricks to really stand out ahead of the competition. Kay, do you want to quickly just introduce yourself? I guess not. So if I just start off, so what do you do once you get the case, which, as you all know, will be sent off at 8 p.m. tonight? And it's really important that you don't actually straight away come up with ideas. It's crucial that you actually read the case independently, and really get a strong understanding of the case for each of your independent team members. Because the worst thing you could possibly do is that you come up with a really great solution, but to the wrong question. So really important that everyone reads the case independently and just gains an understanding of the organization and the context. Next stage of the brainstorming kind of process is to just think about the key questions and the fundamental issues that confront the organization. So this is just purely writing down or discussing what the key issues are, and at the core, what really has caused this problem to arise. And now, thirdly, after you've done those two stages, then should be the time where you start to think about your strategy. And we'll delve into this a bit later on in the presentation, but how to use frameworks such as SCQA and SWOT to brainstorm and just get a better understanding of the case. And of course, once you have all these potential strategies, it's really important to be able to conduct research, back up your solutions with data, and continue to refine through all these potential strategies that you've created. So this is not something that is completely necessary, but we feel that designating roles can definitely make your team more productive. So I've kind of just broadly listed out 4 roles that I think can correspond well to the team members. And these broadly cover the introduction and the slide master. So this individual will be mainly looking at how to structure the problem in a way that leads to your proposal. Most of the time, they're also responsible for much of the team's PowerPoint presentation and just the design elements in that. Next, we have a strategy person. So they're the person who really understands the strategy at an extremely deep level. So while everyone should really be playing a role in coming up with a strategy, this individual understands the why, the what, and how the strategy in really granular detail. Next, we have a marketing person. Now, this may not be applicable to every case, but in the instance that it does, marketing is obviously a very huge part of any sort of solution and can often be a solution in and of itself. And lastly, financials, a very important part of the case as well, ensuring that your solutions are numerically justified and they're not just kind of ideas that are tossed around without any backing. So financial persons will be, of course, responsible for quantifying the impact of your solution. And they're more often than not also considering key risks and how the implementation plays out. So for University of Melbourne students, the library actually has access to some really great resources. We've listed quite a few here and we've again placed them on the matrix so you can kind of understand where each of these fit in, because it's quite difficult to understand kind of which ones to use when you're faced with so many different resources and websites out there. For GMCC case specifically, since it is based on EMI, who are an international, well, they're Laotian-based microfinance institution, we'd be thinking that the top right resources there would be most applicable when you go about conducting your research. So now moving on to specifically how do we analyze an issue? So how do you break down the case once it is sent out again today at 8 p.m? So we presented I alluded to two kind of frameworks that you can use to help understand the situation in a bit more detail. And I'll go through the first one. And many of you may have seen this already, but it's what we call a SWOT analysis. So stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And really, this is just to help you wrap your head around the case. This should really not be included in your actual slide deck. It's more so to allow you to gain an understanding among your team about, again, the core issues. What does the organization do well? What do they kind of lack, and what their competitors do? And again, looking at opportunities and threats. So these kind of lend towards then thinking about your solution. So what opportunities are there? Are there any particular needs in this market? Is there anything that has driven a need for a solution? And of course, what are the threats? And in this particular case, what you'll find is that privacy and a regulatory environment should be really key considerations as you go about presenting your solution. And next, we'll talk about an SCQA. And now this one is, I think, better to put into your actual case, as it allows for a really logical flow of ideas. I think the way in which this framework is presented, by first having a situation leading to a complication, a question, and then an answer, is extremely logical. And you can kind of use this to storyboard or organize your deck when you go to present it. So I'll just quickly run through each of these, and we start off with situation. So this just really entails coming up with, understanding what the situation is, what does the industry look like, where it's headed, and then from there, why is there a complication? So what has really caused this problem to arise, and really understanding that. Next, you really want to frame this as a question. So establishing what you're solving is really important, because it just allows the people screening it, so the judges, to understand where you're heading with the case. Having a really clear, defined question as well, make sure that you're creating solutions that do directly answer that question and don't go off on a tangent. And finally, once you've established your question, of course, you present your solution. So, what kind of solution what kind of question are you solving? And, just detailing out your strategies in the depth that you've researched. So now I'll just hand it over to Kay to present the second half of our tips and tricks. And we'll start off with how you generate these strategies to begin with.
Apologies, I didn't introduce myself earlier. My name is Kay and I'm the GMCC officer for this year, helping to run the Global Microfinance Case Competition. I'll get started and I'll be pretty brief, because most of this is pretty basic for most of you who would have done a couple, but this is really just a reminder, as well as some sort of useful advice for those who might not have done many case competitions before. So basically, when you get the case later today, or whenever you start working on it, you're going to want to sort of structure your approach over your first few days, and when you're breaking down the problem. The first step that we would recommend is to really write down all of the ideas you can think about that relate to the case, and all of the issues which you identified and structured your analysis around. And then once you've like generated all of these great ideas, then you're going to want to spend some time really re-examining them, see if they actually work out beyond just, an idea on a whiteboard, see if they actually work out in reality, if there's any sort of evidence around them. And then ultimately you're going to want to refine them. And this is where, someone in your team can play like a bit of a devil's advocate role, seeing if there's any potential holes in your strategy or risks and mitigations that you need to think about. Next, Oscar. Cool. All right. So the next part is something that we find particularly important, particularly when dealing with a real client, as we are this year. And that's developing an actual storyline to your presentation. Not only does it make it memorable, it's also a really good way of structuring your thinking from the beginning by first ensuring that you have a really comprehensive understanding of the problem in the first place, which is obviously an essential part of the story. And then once you've laid out all of the key issues in a really structured way, it then allows you to then propose a strategy which addresses those key problems that you identified at the beginning. And telling it in this type of way allows you to ultimately, present a solution which everything is really cohesive. And then ultimately, the sort of last stage is to justify exactly why your strategies, which you propose, answer the problem and what sort of impacts they can generate in terms of financials and stuff like that. And yeah, so the final part is financials. Yeah. So it's pretty much like an expectation that most high-level submissions will have an element of financial analysis around them, so that they're not just some ideas, so that there's actually some thinking around the feasibility and how much things are going to cost and stuff like that. Particularly, the type of metrics that we see the most in the GMCCs are things around revenues and costs, and ultimately like an NPV or an IRR as a sort of more financial metric. But I will say that when you're reading this year's case, make sure that you're having a look at and having a think about some of the metrics that aren't necessarily like purely financial. So it's always good to consider how much things are going to cost, because it's a real company. It's real money on the line potentially. But ultimately, like if there's some social metrics that you can consider that aren't exclusively financial, for example, that might be either mentioned in the case or like from your research, you might find relevant to the area. That's absolutely something that we would be really interested in seeing, and so would the client. So yeah, that sort of wraps up everything. And yeah, we'd love to answer any of your questions relating to GMCC this year.
Feel free to just put those in the chat, or if you'd like, so you can speak up and ask us directly. Yeah. Yeah, Kay, so do you want to answer Richard's question? I think it's a really, really good one, because that is one that is, common across many case competitions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the question is essentially like how should you best present your financial section, given that you don't have too much like detailed information? So yeah, that's exactly right. Like you won't be provided with, a full financial record of the company this year. You'll just be provided with sort of basic data, because it's, the case problem doesn't really require it. So because of this, really like the focus will be on, for the strategies that you do propose, you're going to want to like consider how much they're going to cost, whether those costs seem reasonable relative to the scale of the operations of the business, which you should be able to gather. So ultimately like a cost breakdown, and then as well as, those other key non-strictly financial metrics that I was talking about, like whether there's, a specific problem that is outlined in the case, which you think there is a really good metric to measure like progress in. So for example, let's say they're trying to fix something, make something better. Is there a specific metric that you can use where they can then evaluate like their performance before and after that strategy is implemented? And then, so for example, in your financial section, you might say like, we think that in an optimistic outcome, you will go from like this number to like this number for this metric, which proves that like this strategy will work, something like that. Yeah, Richard, does that answer your question? Awesome.
I'd like to just add on also when, even though we haven't given, very detailed financial information, a lot of the time it is still important to report non-financial metrics that are still quantitative. So for example, if it was like a customer acquisition case, you'd want to obviously present how many customers you'd be able to acquire, like just things like that. And in our case, you'll soon find out that's something like how many extra loans, processed. Metrics like those would be really valuable to include in your presentation as well. So we've also just got another question that's been messaged to me privately. What are you looking for when screening cases? So yeah, obviously very important for you guys to understand what we are looking for as we receive submissions. So for me anyway, I think the most important thing that I'm looking for is just solutions that are presented in a really logical manner. So if I can just read every line of your slides from start to finish, and I can understand where you're going and headed with the solution, that's a strong signal to me that the team has thought out the case in a lot of depth and also presented their solution in a manner that is easy to understand and easy to follow. On top of this, I think it's really important that your solutions are both feasible and of course something that the company themselves shouldn't have immediately considered, because they're coming to us as consultants for a reason, and it's not to provide them with solutions that they would have already come up with. So at the same time, it's trying to manage a feasible solution that is also exciting and innovative at the same time. So those are kind of what I'm looking for in terms of a high quality solution. Kay, do you have any thoughts as to that?
Absolutely. A couple things from me. I'd say something that we absolutely love to see is really comprehensive research into the case, but research sort of isn't enough. We really want you to draw key insights. So we don't want to just see like a bunch of statistics and graphs and stuff like that, unless there's some sort of meaning to like how this impacts the narrative of your presentation and how this impacts, the case and what sort of insight we can draw out of it, what sort of actionable sort of insight we actually draw out of it. So that's something we like to see, not synthesis rather than just description of things that are happening at the moment. Another thing we like to see is a really strong storyline. So if you can make it fun and structure it in a really cool way, which both covers all of the key issues in your strategies really well, but is also quite memorable and interesting, and that we can tell there's a lot of thought been put into it. It not only helps us when we're sort of marking it in terms of like which ones we feel make the most sense and which ones flow the best. They're also very memorable, so we're more likely to remember your teams as one of the top teams. Another thing, I think that's probably all. That's probably the main things from me.
Great.
Sorry, hold on. There was one more thing I forgot. Given that we've got a real client this year, we like to see some creativity with the solutions, but also keeping it relatively realistic. So we like to see, we would like to see something where you've really thought hard about, like obviously if it's depending on the scale of the business, you're not going to want to promote something which is really, really, really expensive for them to implement, for example. So yeah, something which is really well thought out, but also a little bit creative as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think those are all really important considerations, and we'll be looking out for those when we go about screening your submissions. So I think that's all the time that we have for today. Just before we wrap up today's workshop, here are just, again, the key dates for GMCC this year. So please note that these dates are specifically for the University of Melbourne. So some key points where they differ are that the 25th is for the University of Melbourne's participants and also for those who are participating internationally. For all other domestic universities, yours will be due on the 23rd. So please refer back to the information that has been provided by your partner universities, just to make sure that you're across, the timelines, because there are different timelines that are running between universities. And of course, you all receive an email very shortly at 8 p.m. tonight with the case. So very excited for that. And that's all from us. So before you leave, it'd be great if you could fill out this feedback form here. Thank you everyone for coming and best of luck.
Hi, Karthik, Kayan. Yes. Depending on your relevant partner university, that will be sent through to you at stage. Just message the relevant page if you haven't received that yet.
Yeah, so for those asking about the case which will be sent out, it's going to be sent out after 8 p.m. our time. So that's in like around half an hour. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the case for like this case competition, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so the case that you'll solve and present a solution for is going to be sent out in half an hour if you've already registered, or if you register like later tonight or tomorrow, yeah, you'll get it.
Yeah, I mean, just for those who are registering later, there's no way, unfortunately, that we can automate them to send as you register. So what that means is like, we'll be periodically checking into the form and emailing as that happens. So you'll receive them, as quickly as we can get back to you, but just know that it won't be instant for those registering after today.